They called me a gig worker with no real plan, a 2-8-year-old woman who designed logos from her kitchen table and called it a career. My stepmother said it like she was doing me a kindness, cutting through my delusions with the clean, caring blade of honesty. My stepbrother Marcus laughed first, then caught himself and turned it into a cough. The man they'd invited to Christmas dinner, a developer from Atlanta, with a firm handshake and a laminated presentation, just nodded politely and reached for another dinner roll, already calculating. They had a deal in motion. They had a vision, a contract, a number with enough zeros to change all their lives. What they didn't know, what none of them had taken 5 minutes to actually verify, was that my father had already changed everything. 3 years before he died, quietly and without ceremony, he had put the building into a trust. My name, only mine. By the time I sat down at that Christmas table, I owned the ground they were standing on. I just hadn't told them yet. Contracts beat assumptions, every single time. The drive to my stepmother's house took 22 minutes through streets strung with lights. My father had bought this house in 1997, the year I turned 3. He'd repainted the shutters every 5 years, fixed the porch boards himself, and kept a specific brand of WD-40 under the kitchen sink because the back door hinge squealed in cold weather. Diane had repainted everything white when she moved in after the wedding. The WD-40 was gone, the hinge still squealed. I pushed through the back door at 6:15. The smell was immediate, her rosemary chicken, which she made for every occasion that required performing domesticity, and underneath it, the faint cedar of my father's old study, still closed off at the end of the hall. She'd never converted it. That surprised me, even now. "Nora!" Finally. Diane appeared from the kitchen doorway, a dish towel over her shoulder and a smile that said she'd been rehearsing. She was 61, slender in the way people get when they eat small meals on principle, and her hair was always the exact same shade of chestnut. "You look tired. Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine," I said. "Merry Christmas, Diane." The living room was rearranged. She'd pushed the furniture back to make space for a folding table that extended the dining room into the next room. Extra chairs. I counted 8 place settings. My father's house seated 6. My half-brother Dev was on the couch, headphones around his neck, 17 years old and already 6 feet, looking at his phone with the focused misery of a teenager trapped in a holiday he hadn't agreed to attend. He looked up when I came in. Something shifted in his expression, not quite relief, but the recognition of an ally. "Hey," he said. "Hey." I dropped my bag on the chair beside him. "Who's coming?" Before he could answer, Marcus appeared from the hall. He was 26, Diane's son from her first marriage, and he carried himself with the specific energy of someone who'd been told he was impressive for so long he'd stopped bothering to actually be impressive. He wore a blazer to Christmas dinner. He was holding a glass of bourbon. "Nora." He spread his arms as if we were old friends who'd been separated by geography rather than mutual tolerance. "You drove up from Asheville?" "I live 40 minutes away, Marcus." Right. The apartment." He said it the way people say the apartment, with a fraction of a pause before and after, a breath of space that turned a neutral word into a gentle verdict. "How's the freelance stuff going?" "Well," I said. "Good for you." He raised his glass, which was the conversational equivalent of a pat on the head. Tough market for creatives right now. Dev caught my eye. A quick look, sympathetic and exhausted. He was the only honest person in this house, and he knew it. The guests arrived at 6:30. Patrick Webb, the developer, and his associate, a quiet woman named Cheryl who took notes on her phone and said very little. My Aunt Diane's sister Beverly, who attended every family gathering like a fact-checker for future grievances, completed the party. She wore a red cardigan and already had opinions about the seating arrangement. Dinner was staged, not cooked. Diane had plated everything before we sat down, which meant the food was warm but not hot, beautiful but not quite right. We passed dishes in a specific order. There were cloth napkins. Patrick Webb was 40-something, broad-shouldered, with the practiced confidence of a man who spent his days turning conversations into transactions. He shook my hand firmly when Diane introduced us. "Patrick, this is Carl's other daughter, Nora." "She's the creative one." She smiled when she said creative. It did not mean what the word means. The small talk lasted through the salad course. Then Marcus set down his fork. "So, Patrick, he said, leaning back in his chair. Tell everyone what we've been talking about. Patrick nodded, comfortable with the spotlight. Happy to. I've been working with Diane and Marcus on a concept for the Millbrook property, the corner building on your dad's commercial lot. He looked at me when he said, your dad's. A test or a courtesy, I wasn't sure. It's a remarkable piece of land. The neighborhood's been moving up for 3 years. The dental office lease runs out in March, which actually opens up the timing perfectly. Millbrook. My father had bought that building when I was 11. Ground floor, a dental office that had been there 14 years. Upper floor, used for storage during his business, and empty since he'd retired. He used to take me there on Saturday mornings when he had maintenance to do. He'd give me a clipboard and let me walk around pretending to inspect things. I'd tap walls and nod seriously. He'd say, "What's the structural report, Inspector?" I'd say, "Load-bearing walls are solid, sir." He'd say, "Good. A building's only as strong as what it's built on." "What's the concept?" I asked. My voice was even. Marcus answered before Patrick could. Mixed use. Ground floor retail, upper 2 floors, luxury residential. The corner lot alone is worth more than the building sitting on it right now. We convert, we sell units. The family gets a real return on an asset that's basically been sitting idle for 2 years. It's not idle, I said. Dr. Kamara's lease generates income. Diane's smile tightened by 1 degree. A dental office, Nora. When the alternative is a multi-unit development that would triple the value. She touched her napkin. Your father, God rest him, was wonderful. But he was not a developer. He held on to things out of sentiment. We have to be practical now. Practical, I repeated. The probate court finalizes in February, Marcus said, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd already done the research, or thought he had. Once the estate transfer clears, we move quickly. Patrick's team can break ground by summer. Beverly nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose opinion was about to be validated by events. Dev had gone very still. He was 17 and smart enough to know what was happening, but too young to know what to do about it. Under the table, his knee pressed once against mine. A code. I felt it and gave nothing away. You know what your problem is, Nora? Marcus leaned forward, warm and expansive, a man explaining something for her own good. You're talented, genuinely. I've always said that. But you're playing small. A logo here, a branding packet there. You're 40 minutes from a city that's growing and you're designing menus for restaurants. Restaurant branding, I said, is actually my least profitable vertical. My point is, he gestured vaguely at the space between us. You could be doing so much more. If you had real capital, a stake in something, this deal, if we all move forward together, gives this family a foundation, something solid. He said solid the way people say it when they mean financially certain, not in the literal, structural sense. Dad would have wanted us to make something of it. There it was. Dad would have wanted. The phrase people use when they've decided what a dead man's wishes were and don't want to be contradicted. I looked at the fireplace mantel. A photograph sat in a square silver frame. My father at the Millbrook building, maybe 8 years ago, standing in front of the door with his arms crossed and his head slightly tilted, the expression he made when he was proud of something he'd done himself. He looked like a man who'd read every clause of every document he'd ever signed. I picked up my fork. The rosemary chicken is very good, Diane. She blinked. Then, gratefully, she pivoted to asking Patrick about his other projects. I excused myself before dessert. The downstairs bathroom was wallpapered in a faded toil pattern Diane had chosen, and my father had lived with patiently for 12 years. I stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists and looked at my own face in the mirror. I was not angry. That was the thing I noticed. I'd expected anger, or humiliation, or the hot prickling shame of being the family's cautionary tale at the dinner table. Instead, I felt something quiet and precise, the same feeling I got when a client sent me a brief, and I immediately saw exactly what was wrong with their current brand, and exactly how to fix it. They were building a plan on a foundation they hadn't verified. I dried my hands. I pulled out my phone. A text from Dev, sent 6 minutes ago. They've been talking about this for 2 months. Be careful. I opened my contacts. Elliot Marsh. He'd been my father's attorney for 20 years and had handled my father's estate documents. I knew it was Christmas. I texted anyway. Elliot, need to ask you something about Millbrook when you're available. Specifically, the trust documents Dad set up 3 years ago. Sorry for the holiday intrusion. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I walked back to the table, sat down, and ate a small piece of Diane's store-bought cheesecake. I told Beverly her cardigan was a nice color. I thanked Patrick for dinner conversation and told him his project sounded ambitious. He smiled. He had no idea it was not a compliment. The drive back to my apartment took 22 minutes. I spent the first 10 replaying every word Marcus had said, not because it hurt, but because I was cataloging. The confidence. The probate court finalizes in February. The way Patrick had referenced the dental office lease like it was a minor inconvenience rather than a legal obligation. They'd done research, but they'd started from the wrong premise. They'd assumed the building was in the estate. That one assumption was the entire structure of their plan, and if it was wrong, nothing else held. My apartment was small by design and intention. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a living room that served as my studio. 2 monitors on a standing desk, a drafting light, a shelf of typography, references, and brand identity books. My family called it the apartment. My 3 long-term clients called the address on my invoices and didn't care what it looked like. I sat down at my desk. I did not open a design file. I opened a browser. My father had mentioned the trust once, 2 years before he died. In the way he mentioned things he considered already handled. We'd been having coffee at Millbrook on a Saturday. I still did maintenance checks with him, even as an adult, and he'd said, without much preamble, I restructured how the building's held. Talk to Elliot. It's cleaner this way. I'd asked what that meant. He'd said, it means when I'm gone, it goes where I decide, not where a court decides. I'd nodded. I'd been 31, thinking about a brand pitch due Monday, and I hadn't asked the follow-up question I should have asked. I typed into the county recorder's search portal. I entered the address for the Millbrook property. The parcel results loaded slowly. Document type, Declaration of Trust, Grantor, Carl James Howell. Date recorded, 41 months ago. I clicked the link. The PDF loaded in sections. The Howell Family Revocable Living Trust. I read the opening clauses. Trustor, Carl James Howell. Initial trustee, Carl James Howell. Successor trustee upon the trustor's incapacity or death. I stopped breathing. Successor trustee and sole beneficiary, Nora C. Howell. I read it 3 more times. The letters did not rearrange themselves. Not the estate. Not Diane. Not the family. A revocable living trust passes outside of probate entirely. When my father died, the building had not gone into the estate Diane was waiting on the court to finalize. It had transferred to me by operation of the trust document automatically as of the date of his death, 16 months ago. Marcus and Diane had been making plans for 16 months on property I already owned. My phone lit up. Elliot Marsh, returning my text at 10:42 on Christmas night because he was 70 years old and never fully stopped working. Saw your name and figured I'd call. Pick up if you're awake. I picked up. Elliot. Merry Christmas, Nora. His voice was dry and precise. He sounded like a document. I suspect this isn't a social call. Tell me about the Millbrook Trust. A pause. Then, quietly, so they've made their move. They have a developer at the dinner table and a probate timeline. The probate is irrelevant. His voice carried the calm of a man who had delivered this kind of news before, the calm of certainty. The building never entered the estate. Your father executed the trust correctly. It was recorded with the county, titled in the trust's name, and the successor trustee designation is unambiguous. You've been the legal owner of that property since the day he died. A beat. I sent you a letter 14 months ago explaining this. I thought about the letter. I thought about 14 months ago, when I'd been managing 3 clients through a rebrand, when my father's death was still a fresh and disordering thing, when I'd put a thick envelope from Elliot's office on my desk, meaning to read it carefully, and then had not read it carefully. I thought about what it would have meant to read it carefully then. I understand, I said. The question now, Elliot continued, is what you want to do about it. I looked at my desk, my monitors, the typography books, the small, deliberate life I had built in this apartment they called a joke. I want to do everything correctly and quickly, I said. and I want to do it before they spend another day planning a sale they can't complete. Call me at 8 tomorrow, Elliot said. We'll begin. I stayed at my desk until 2 in the morning. I pulled the county recorder portal back up and read every document attached to the Millbrook parcel. The trust, the original deed transfer from my father's name into the trust, recorded the same week he'd mentioned it to me over coffee. The dental office lease, which I found in my email archives, my father had forwarded it to me 5 years ago, saying simply, "For your information, in case I'm ever unavailable and Kamara has questions." I had thought it was just his methodical nature. It was a map. I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Millbrook Howell Trust Active. I began building the record. At 8 the next morning, I was back at my desk with black coffee when Elliot called. He walked me through it in order, the same way my father used to explain structural problems. Foundation first, then walls, then roof. The trust certification, he said, was the document that proved to the world, to banks, to title companies, to anyone who needed to know that I was the trustee and beneficiary. He had it ready. I needed to sign, notarize, and record it with the county. By 10, I was at a UPS store 2 blocks from my apartment, signing in front of a notary who had seen everything and was moved by nothing. The embosser made it sound a finality I felt in my back teeth. I courier shipped the document to the county recorder's office, priority, with a return confirmation. I called the insurance broker who'd covered the building under my father's policy. I explained that the trust had transferred, that I was now the named insured, and that I needed the policy updated and the declaration page sent to me directly. She was efficient. She had it done before noon. I called Dr. Kamara's office manager. I introduced myself as the new trustee and owner of the building, explained that nothing about the lease terms was changing, and asked them to update their remittance contact information. The office manager said, "Oh, we knew your father. He was wonderful. We're glad the building is in good hands." I thanked her and meant it. That afternoon, Marcus called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was cheerful, practiced, unbothered. "Hey, Nora, just wanted to circle back from last night. Patrick's team wants to get a site visit scheduled for next week, get some eyes on the upper floor before the new year. Figured we could make it a family thing, bring Dev, kind of a send-off for the old building. Let me know what works." He sounded like a man who had never once been told no by a document. I did not call back. I forwarded his voicemail to Elliot. Dev texted at 4. "Marcus is telling Mom that she's already talking about what she's going to do with her share. What is happening?" I typed back, "Don't say anything yet, just keep me posted. You're doing great." He replied, "Are you about to do something?" I replied, "I'm going to do something very boring and procedural that will have dramatic consequences." His response was 3 exclamation points, which I took as support. On the 27th, the county recorder's e-portal updated. Howell Family Revocable Living Trust. Millbrook Commercial Property Trustee of Record. Nora C. Howell. Indexed and confirmed. I ran a title search myself, the way my father had taught me to always verify what you think you know. My name was the only name that mattered. The title was clean and sealed. I drafted a letter to Patrick Webb's development company. The language was Elliot's, but I'd asked to write the first draft so I understood every word. It informed them that any prior discussions regarding the Millbrook property had been conducted by parties with no legal ownership or authority. It stated that the property was held in trust with a named sole trustee, that no sale, development agreement, or access permission had been granted, and that any further contact regarding the property should be directed to Elliot Marsh, Esquire. I signed it. Nora C. Howell, Trustee. Howell Family Revocable Living Trust. Elliot reviewed and approved it. We emailed it on the 28th at 9 in the morning. The reply came from Patrick's office at noon, 2 sentences from his assistant. They were aware of the situation and would be in touch with questions. The tone was the tone of a man who'd been burned once by bad information and was now being carefully neutral until he understood who he was actually dealing with. He was dealing with me. He would figure that out. Diane called on the 29th. I picked up. "Nora." Her voice was controlled, but only just. "We need to talk." "I agree," I said. Elliot Marsh sent Patrick some kind of letter. Patrick forwarded it to Marcus, and he's very upset. He says there's been some kind of mistake with the trust document. "There isn't," I said. A silence. The kind that happens when a person who has been holding a plan for a long time first feels the plan shift under them. Nora, your father always intended this property to benefit the family, all of us. He wouldn't have wanted. Diane. My voice was not unkind. He filed a legal document 3 years before he died. He hired an attorney. He recorded it with the county. That was his intention, in writing, with his signature on it. Another silence. Longer. We should have dinner. The family should talk in person. New Year's Eve, everyone's free. I understood what she meant. She wanted the table, the candles, the setting where she controlled the staging, and I was the outsider, arriving at the place set nearest the kitchen. She wanted to look at me across the rosemary chicken and renegotiate with emotion what she could not renegotiate with law. I'll be there, I said. I spent the 30th the way I spent every day my father had taught me to respect, doing the work. I billed 2 clients, delivered a finalized brand kit, and took a call with a restaurant group who wanted a full identity overhaul in the new year. My stepmother thought I was playing small. I was playing long. That evening, I drove to Millbrook. I hadn't been since August. The building sat on its corner the way my father's buildings always sat, quietly, taking up exactly the space it was entitled to. No more. The dental office lights were off for the week. The upper floor windows were dark. I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching the streetlight catch the brick. My father had taken me here the October before he got sick. We'd walked the upper floor together, which was empty by then, the old storage cleared out. He'd stopped at the center of the main room and put his hand on one of the interior walls, the way he always did, checking for soundness by instinct. You know why this building's still standing when the ones around it have been torn down twice? He'd asked. I'd guessed at the foundation. He'd shaken his head. Load-bearing walls, he'd said. The ones that actually hold the weight. You can change everything else, windows, floors, fixtures, but if you identify the load-bearing walls and you protect them, the structure survives. He'd paused, and in the pause I'd understood he wasn't only talking about the building. I got out of my car. I had a key. I always had a key. The upper floor was cold and dark and smelled of old wood and the specific dusty quiet of a room that has been left alone. I stood in the center, my hand on the wall my father had touched. The plaster was cool, solid, exactly as it had been. I thought about Diane's dinner table, the cloth napkins and the laminated presentation, the developer's firm handshake and Marcus's bourbon and the word creative said in that particular way. I thought about what they'd assumed and for how long they'd assumed it. I thought about how a building can look completely available until someone checks the title. Then I drove home and printed 3 copies of every document. The printer hummed in the quiet of my apartment. Each page landed in the tray with a specific weight, not the weight of paper but of fact. The trust certification, the county recording index, the updated insurance declaration, Dr. Kamara's lease, the letter to Patrick Webb's company, Elliot's confirmation that no probate claim could touch a trust asset. I organized them into 3 clear document folders, the kind with the plastic cover. I labeled each tab in my own handwriting, the same precise lettering I used on client deliverables: trust, tenancy, correspondence. I placed the folders in a single manila envelope, sturdy, unglamorous, the kind my father had used for every important document he'd ever handed me. I set it on my desk. I looked at it for a moment, then I opened my bedside drawer and took out the last thing my father had left me directly. Not through a trust or a legal document, but simply by being my father. A small folded note, written on his architectural drafting paper in his draftsman's pencil, left on the kitchen table the morning he went to the hospital for the last time. He must have written it before the ambulance came, in the 10 minutes between the call and their arrival. The handwriting was still steady. A building's only as strong as what it's built on. You know this. Dad. I folded the note back along its original crease. I slipped it into the front pocket of the envelope. New Year's Eve arrived gray and cold. I was dressed before 5. Dark slacks, a white button-down, the cognac leather boots I wore to client presentations. My father had given me the boots for my 26th birthday. They had good soles. Dev texted at 5:40. Mom invited someone else tonight. Not Patrick, some guy from a law firm she's been talking to. She said it's just a family friend. It's not a family friend. I texted back, thanks for the heads up. I'll be there at 7. Are you bringing something? he asked. Yes, I said. Good, he replied. I picked up the manila envelope. It was not dramatic. It was not a leather folio with a brass zipper and the weight of ceremony. It was the kind of envelope you'd find in any office supply store, the kind my father had used his whole life because he cared about what was inside them, not what they looked like on the outside. I tucked it under my arm. I turned off my lights. The back door at Diane's house still squealed. Everyone was there. Diane at the kitchen pivot, Marcus holding court at the head of the table my father had bought, Beverly already stationed near the cheese board, Dev on the couch looking at his phone with focused attention that was not actually about his phone, and a new man, 50s, in a dark suit that cost more than my monthly rent, seated at the far end of the table with a glass of club soda and the patient stillness of someone who billed by the hour. Diane introduced him. Nora, this is Gerald. He's a family friend who works in estate law. She smiled. We thought it might be helpful to have someone with legal context tonight. Her voice carried the warmth of an ambush. Gerald stood and shook my hand. His grip was evaluating. I met his eyes and held them 1 second longer than was comfortable, and then I let go. Dev appeared at my elbow, close enough to be a wall. He said nothing. He didn't need to. We sat for dinner. Diane had made the rosemary chicken again, and the specific familiarity of it, the smell, the plated presentation, the performance settled something cold and clear in my chest. This was the same play, same script, different title card. They had looked at me across this table before and decided what I was, and they were doing it again, and this time they'd brought a lawyer to make the conclusions stick. Marcus led the table through the first course with the ease of a man who believed tonight was already decided. He talked about the new year, about momentum, about the importance of moving quickly in a hot real estate market. He talked about the difficulty of managing legacy assets when a family was not financially coordinated. He used the phrase financially coordinated 3 times. He used family 7 times. Diane watched him the way a stage manager watches a lead actor, ready to prompt if needed. Gerald was quieter. He was the closer, not the opener. He was waiting for his cue. Nora. Marcus turned to me midway through the main course, comfortable, inevitable. I know the letter from Elliot was unexpected. I want you to know we're not trying to cut you out of anything. That was never the intent. He smiled. It was almost genuine. Gerald's helped us understand that a trust like Dad's, created while he was still well, can still be subject to equitable distribution challenges if there are questions about intent. If a court found that Dad didn't fully understand the implications, my father was an architect, I said. He built load-bearing walls by design and he signed legal documents by intent. He hired Elliot Marsh for 31 years because Elliot is precise and honest and doesn't let clients file things they don't understand. Gerald cleared his throat, gentle and professional. The question of intent in trust formation is a legitimate legal avenue. Courts do examine. I'm not going to court, I said, because there's nothing to litigate. I looked at Gerald, directly and without apology. The trust is clean. The title is clean. The recording is 41 months old with a clear chain of custody. Any challenge would require proving my father was incompetent at formation, and his medical records from that period will not support that. You've done this long enough to know when a document is solid. Gerald looked at me for a moment. Then, slowly, he took a small sip of his club soda. He did not disagree. I reached into the bag by my chair. I placed the manila envelope on the table, in the center, between the chicken and the cheese board. It made a quiet, specific sound against the oak. No ceremony, just paper. Diane's eyes went to it. Marcus set down his fork. I opened the envelope. I drew out the first document folder, tabbed and labeled, and turned it face up so the table could read the header. Howell Family Revocable Living Trust. Trust Certification. Nora C. Howell, Trustee. This is the trust certification, I said. My voice was the same voice I used on client calls, calm and specific and not asking for permission. It's the document that functions as proof of the trust's existence and my authority as trustee. It's what I present to banks, title companies, and anyone who needs to transact with this property. I slid it to the center of the table. Diane was very still. Beverly's fan was motionless in her hand. I opened the second folder. This is the county recording confirmation. Index number, date stamp, chain of title. When Patrick Webb's company ran their title search, which they did, because they're a professional development firm, and that's the first thing you do before you build on anything, they would have hit this wall. I turned the page to face Gerald. I imagine that's actually why Patrick stepped back without much argument. Gerald looked at the document. A professional shift moved through his expression. Not embarrassment exactly, more like recalibration. Marcus broke first. Dad created that trust without telling any of us. That's not how a family works. That's not fair. He told me, I said. Not meanly. Just true. He mentioned it 2 years before he died. I didn't understand the full implication at the time, but he told me. He was the kind of man who told the people he'd decided to tell. I paused. He was also the kind of man who didn't need everyone's approval for a legal decision about his own property. He left Diane nothing. Marcus's voice cracked slightly on the name. Genuine, that part. He did love his mother in the specific way people love their anchors. He left Diane this house, I said quietly. He left her the entirety of his personal estate, which is what the probate filing covers. He also lived here with her for 18 years and made her the beneficiary of his life insurance. I looked at Diane. I know that doesn't feel like enough. I'm not here to argue about what's fair. I'm here because you invited a developer and a lawyer to my father's Christmas table and made plans for a building you don't own. That's what I'm here about. Diane looked. For the first time, not like a woman running a stage, but like a woman who was very tired. Her eyes were bright with something that was either anger or the thing that lives just underneath anger. Nora, she said, at least let us the upper floor. Marcus has ideas, real ideas. If you're not going to use it, I am going to use it. I reached into the third folder. I pulled out a single sheet, my own paper this time, my own document, drafted 2 days ago in the quiet of my apartment. I placed it gently in front of her. I'm converting the upper floor. Phased renovation, starting in the spring. I'm going to run Howell Creative out of there, my firm, with 2 employees I've been planning to hire for a year. Ground floor lease stays as is because Dr. Kamara's practice has been there for 14 years and they're good tenants. I paused. I'm calling it the Howell Building officially. There will be a plaque. Marcus stared at the paper. You can't, you're a freelancer. I'm a brand identity consultancy with 4 anchor clients and a wait list, I said. I've been playing small deliberately because my overhead was low and I was building cash reserves. I'm done playing small. Gerald had stopped performing the role of family friend. He was reading the trust certification with the focused attention of a professional, and what he was reading was confirming what I'd said, because it was correct, because my father had done it correctly. Beverly said something under her breath about airing things in front of guests. I let it pass without turning my head. I took the last item from the envelope. It was small, a folded piece of his drafting paper, and I did not unfold it in front of them. I held it in my palm, just for a second, and I thought about the upper floor with its old wood and its cold, solid walls, the structure that had waited 16 months for someone to come claim it properly. Then I folded the envelope closed. I stacked the document folders inside, neat and deliberate. I looked from Diane to Marcus to Gerald, giving each of them a full moment of my attention. I'm not going to fight you, I said. I don't want to. But I also can't let you build a plan on a foundation that doesn't exist, and I can't let you tell yourselves for another month that this is still a negotiation. I placed my hand flat on the closed envelope. It isn't. The building is held in trust. The trust is mine. The decision about what comes next is mine, and I've made it. I looked at the photograph of my father on the hall table, just visible from where I sat, his arms crossed, his head tilted, proud of what he'd built. He'd made his, too. No one spoke. Gerald capped his pen. The sound was small and loud. Dev was looking at his plate, but I could see the line of his jaw, the held-back thing that wanted to be a smile and was being too smart to show it. I stood. My chair made a soft sound against the floor my father had installed. I gathered the envelope. Thank you for dinner, Diane. The chicken is always good. I nodded to Gerald, who nodded back with a respect that was unexpected and not unwelcome. I looked at Marcus one more time, and I didn't say what I could have said because there was nothing left to prove. Dev stood when I stood. He walked me to the back door. In the hallway, out of earshot, he stopped and reached into his hoodie pocket. He held out a small brass key, tarnished, The kind cut from a hardware store decades ago. Found this in Dad's old workbench, he said quietly. The one in the garage. Mom was going to clear it out. He looked at the key. I think it's for the Millbrook upper floor. Old lock, before the renovation. I took it. It was lighter than I expected. Thank you, I said. He shrugged, but his eyes were serious. You're going to let me come work there, right? When I'm old enough. When you're old enough, I said, you can have a desk. He nodded once, like a contract had been signed. The back door squealed when I pushed it open. The cold hit my face, clean and sharp, smelling of winter and the particular dark green scent of the pine trees my father had planted along the property line 20 years ago. The street was quiet. I walked to my car, the envelope under my arm, the small key in my pocket. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. The building was on my way home. I drove past it without stopping, just a pass on the corner, my headlights sweeping across the brick for one slow second. The dental office dark, the upper floor dark, the whole building patient and quiet and exactly as solid as it had always been. A structure built right doesn't announce itself, it just holds. Load-bearing walls don't move. My father had known that. He'd put it in writing. He'd filed it with the county and sent me a letter I was too busy and too grief-hollowed to read for 14 months. And he'd still been right to do it, because eventually I would sit down and open it, and everything he'd understood about me would still be true. I drove the rest of the way home in the dark, the city lights making their quiet geometry on the windshield, and for the first time in longer than I could calculate, I felt the floor beneath me solid, certain mine. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you want to help it reach more people, hit that boost button. It makes a real difference. I'll see you in the next one.